Association, B'nai Havurah, Trinity Presbyterian, Our Lady Mother of the Church, the Colorado Education Association, and the Pikes Peak Education Association. Thank you so much to all of our volunteers and for all of the time you've spent helping to organize tonight's event.
Yes. Again, it's really a pleasure to see so many familiar faces and many new ones. And just to be able to frame this time together and to highlight some of the goals that we have for this event, I would like to just go over a few things and let you know that over the past few years, we have been close to achieving change at the ballot for education funding challenges, but we really need to continue building up our base. And that's why you're here. We hope to continue the long-term work of movement building and continue to find opportunities to build power and take action together. Presentations that highlights the need for building power. So you'll be able to learn from Great Ed, some 101, get you started, and where you can speak to other folks in a way that can resonate and help them see where we can actually make the changes in legislation and throughout schools in our state and districts. We will also have an opportunity to do some organizing work where you're going to be able to build relationships and share experiences with other folks and what we have been able to facilitate virtually in house meetings. Now, typically I might have a particular beverage for house meetings, but feel free to have your own water or on the side. And at the end, we will return and close with a panel where we will talk about advocacy and organizing with the many parents, students, and educators here with us. And I'm sure we all can think of a legislator or House rep that we really tend to support and go to. So if you're led to share anything with folks who are representatives, definitely do that. So we want to make sure you're feeling empowered to do that and take action. If you know someone who needs to log in now, hit them up and tell them don't miss out either. But we are very grateful for everyone who is here and ready to continue powering up for public education. On that note, I have the honor to introduce Great Education's newest colleague, well, my newest colleague with Great Education Colorado, and that is Cody Austinson. He is the Director of Organizing, and I am not going to take up much more time explaining who he is. I will let him be highlighted now and share with you what he has been so faithfully working on for a couple months now. And just, I'm excited to see the presentation today. Thank you, Cody.
All right, thanks so much, beautiful people, and thank you so much for being here. Before I introduce myself, I would love, I'm going to put my middle school teacher hat back on, and would love to get a feel of like who's here tonight. So if folks wouldn't mind dropping your name, where you're from, and maybe like a perspective you're bringing with you into the conversation. So myself, I am bringing into tonight my perspective as an organizer, a former teacher. My name is Cody, and I am currently in Denver. And so if you want to start letting folks know who you are in the chat, would love to see who's in the room. So again, your name, where you're from, and a perspective that you're bringing. And while you're doing that, I am going to kick us off into just a short presentation to really help us think about our goals for tonight and just thinking about what is really possible if we're coming together to build and continue to build this public movement, or this movement for public education across the state. And so I'm going to tell that through the story of the organization that I work for, Great Education Colorado. Great Ed began in a Denver living room filled with parents sharing concerns about the chronic underfunding of their public schools and how that was affecting students' educational experiences, our civic and community unity, like our ability to really build community, and also just the economic impacts of having a poorly funded school system. And so since that 20 years ago, Great Ed has grown to be a statewide grassroots organization with over 20,000 members all across the state. And so when I was thinking about tonight and really what's possible, I wanted to share a little bit about funding and a little bit about our story to really get us in the mindset of movement building. And I think one of the first things that came to mind for me was really this, we start from our values, and just wanted to share our vision, which is a representation of our values, that we really believe in a Colorado where all children, regardless of where they live, how they learn, or the color of their skin, should be able to graduate from our public schools prepared to lead their best lives. And to me, when I was thinking about this and how this vision connects with movement building work, it reminded me of this idea of a liberatory consciousness, which is first was written about by Barbara Love. If you like to follow up and look at articles or do some Googling. But Barbara Love really described a liberatory consciousness as intentionally imagining a world that is new instead of the world as is. Rejecting the things that we've been socialized to believe, and really giving ourselves the opportunity to imagine and build the world as it could be instead of building the world as it is. And so just thinking about, we're really moving, and I get really fired up about being part of a movement for public education in Colorado, because I just genuinely believe that there's so much more that we could provide for our students and for our educators and for our communities. And so how did that lead Great Ed to focusing on funding? And for us, it comes down to kind of two key questions. One, do our schools have the resources they need to meet the needs of all of their students? Are we even adequately funding our schools? And then with an equity lens, can our schools and teachers meet every student where they are in terms of geographic, demographic, learning, language, and experiential differences? Because we know it's not just about providing more funding to our schools, but really about finding where can we meet students and educators where they're at with the resources that they need. And if I think about funding in that way, adequate and equitable funding can make so many things possible that we care about and want to see in our schools. And so this is kind of a little bit of a teaser for it to be thinking about for our house meetings. What is it that you want to see in your school? And I just want you to take a look at this list and see if anything jumps out for you. If one of these statements is really resonating with you, would love for you to enter that into the chat. Because if we were to really have adequate and equitable funding for our schools, what from this list resonates with you? So I'll give folks an opportunity to do that in the chat. I know for me as a former educator, I would have two things on this list that really resonated with me is one, just my average class size when I taught 7th grade language arts was 30 to 35 students in every one of my sections, which was very overwhelming for me as a new teacher, because I always was trying to find more ways to connect with my students one-on-one, but just that wasn't set up for me in the way that I would hoped that it could have been. And I just know that if we had a more adequate and equitable system, that I would have had more colleagues or more opportunities to be flexible and provide one-on-one attention for students. Awesome. I'm seeing lots of folks in the chat. Keep it going. Because then I also want us to think about, this is happening in pockets for some of our kids in some of our schools. But really what we're hoping for is to be able to say that this should be a possibility for every child to have these opportunities. And so being able to think of ourselves as a statewide community, because I do truly believe this is possible, because Colorado has the resources in our economy to make an investment in our public schools and in our students. Colorado's economy is one of the top state economies, as ranked by U.S. News and World Report. The Colorado Chamber of Commerce in 2018 and 2019 was really excited to celebrate that Colorado was the #1 economy in the country for 2 years in a row. And I checked the stats to just brush myself up before this presentation. And even to and through COVID, we are ranked as the #2 economy in the country. And so if it's not resources that are the issue, then why don't we have a more adequately funded system? And that to me gets us into the conversation about movement building is about building power. Power comes through institutions, our local governments, our school boards. It comes through organized money, whether that be foundations or corporate interests. And it comes through what we're doing tonight, organizing our people power. Because right now we're living in a culture that says that we have a scarcity of resources, and we're actually baking that into the way that we talk about our schools. And so having an opportunity to say, we're going to build power to make it possible for our schools to have a greater investment, or many of the other things that we care about for schools. Because if we look at our state standing in compared to other states around the country, we are far below the average in putting investments into our public schools and into our kids. If you look at this graph here, this black line in the middle at the 0 marker is just the average per pupil funding that is allocated to schools for the number of for each student that's enrolled in their school. And if you notice, Colorado in the mid 1980s was a few $100s above the average. So we were at like a C plus, if we wanted to use a letter grade, in terms of how we were funding our schools. If we follow this falling red line graph below the national average and even track to the 2008 financial crisis, we were at about $1,000 behind the national average. And as economies around the country began to recover, the way that our state constitution works actually prevented us from reinvesting in our public schools, and we continued to drop farther and farther behind, where now we are a little bit over $2,000 behind the national average per student for our schools. And so I want you to think about a school in your community. So just think about it. Maybe this is the school that your student goes to. Maybe it's the school you teach at. Maybe it's a school that is down the street from where you live. And try in your head right now to just like estimate how many students are in that school or in your school community. So if you took that number of students times 2,000, like just what would be possible for your school to be able to accomplish with that investment, right? Just thinking about it, connecting it. And then just the last piece I'd add there is that type of investment would just bring us back to the average. That would bring us back to a C grade. And so if what you were imagining felt transformational, or what you were thinking about felt really important, like that's just what we would be able to accomplish if we demanded the average. And I think that we know that we can strive for more than the average. So it's not just about our comparison across the country. It's our comparison, even just against inflation and the cost it is to live and do business in our community. We have fallen behind inflation, and we measure that through something called the budget stabilization factor. So these bar graphs show us how far behind we are in even being able to fund our schools according to just inflation and the cost of business. And if you see, this starts in 2008. And goes all the way up until this year, 2021, the last 13 years. So this is when our current high school seniors were kindergartners, all the way up through this year into their graduating senior year. These bar graphs add up to $9 billion that have been shortchanged from our public school system because of the budget stabilization factor. An entire generation of youth who have lived in an inadequately funded system. And so continuing to ask ourselves, what are we building power for? What are we up against? We're up against Tabor. Tabor is the so-called Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And I think that impacts us in two ways for a lot of the things we want to see in our public schools. Is one, only voters can increase taxes. And that means that in order to even put the question in front of voters, you have to get the question onto the ballot. For grassroots folks like us, that means collecting over 200,000 signatures from across the state through the power of volunteers. For organized money, that means paying hourly folks an hourly wage to be able to go out and collect signatures, which costs about $3 million to collect about 200,000 signatures. And organizations like Americans for Prosperity can spend that money without sweating. And last year they did that and were able to pass a tax cut without lifting much from their end. And so just we're up against the power of organized money. And Tabor consistently tells our voters that we have a scarcity of resources instead of saying we can put those back into our economy or into our schools. And the consequences is we have some of the least competitive teacher salaries in the country. 95% of our teachers who teach in rural communities don't meet the cost of living to live in their communities. We have around 3,000 teaching slots that don't end up being filled in any given academic school year. Our teachers are retiring faster, leaving the profession more often, and even the number of new teachers graduating from schools of education is declining. We see the consequences of this in 104 of 178 of Colorado's school districts are on a 4-day school week. That's nearly 60% of Colorado's kids going to a district or a school that has a 4-day school week. And for our kids, we know that there's so much that we're going to need to do in order to support not only just the past year of the pandemic that we've experienced, but building back is not just going to be about getting back to normal. Before COVID, we had high ratios of students to nurses and counselors, large class sizes. Schools were losing art, music, PE, electives, limited and lost AP classes, and just even the buildings and the infrastructure that our schools exist in is needing repair. And so all of that to say, I am so excited, and Great Ed is so excited that you're here and being a part of this evening to contribute to the movement for public education in Colorado. Even though we may be stuck in the world as it is, which is a world of inequality currently, we're wanting to fight for a world that is more about equity and justice. And that means all kids having everything that they need and not tapping into the false message of scarcity in our community. So tonight we're asking 2 big questions. What do we want for our schools? And how do we build our power together to get there? And my bias is that I hope we walk away committed building our power together. And with that, I'll just share. If you're interested in connecting with Great Ed, definitely let us know. Here's our social media handles. Annalise is our social media guru, and she's excited to interact. And also, we are more than happy to come to your place of worship, your group, your school, your PTA, your business, or even just a group of parents and students and interested community members to talk more about funding and how you can get involved. And so with that, I'll kick it back to our wonderful co-hosts. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Cody. Before we move on to our next section, we do have a few people who just joined during that presentation. So thanks for being here and welcome. Just want to remind everyone, if you could please, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, choose your preferred language. There's a little button, it looks like a globe in between your share screen and your reactions. You can just click on that for your preferred language. And Chris, would you share that again, please? Oh, you're ready to roll, I see you.
Yep. Si necesitan interpretación del inglés al español, van a hacer clic en el globo abajo en tu pantalla de Zoom. Está al lado del círculo de record y de reactions. Y enseguida tienen que escoger la opción de español. Si tienen cualquier pregunta o comentario mientras que estamos hablando, lo pueden decir en español y luego lo traducimos al inglés para todos.
Thank you. Next up, we have a few guest speakers who are going to share their testimony with their experiences related to public education. First, we have a parent from DPS, Cody Egart, and a leader in CCG and Denver NAACP, Michael Reed. And speakers, welcome. Thank you for being here this evening. While you're speaking, if you could help our Spanish-speaking listeners or guests and listeners and just speak slowly so that their interpretation can be easily heard. So first, we'll start with Cody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. So my name is Cody. I'm a parent of 2 students that attend Denver Public Schools. When my children, they're now in high school, but when my children were in elementary school, they attended Swigert Elementary, which is located in the Central Park neighborhood. Swigert was and is a high achieving and highly resourced school, mostly because of the economic access of the families that attended Swigert. My choice in choosing the school was solely based on my idea of where I thought my children would have the most access to the best educational opportunities, and indeed, I was right. They were able to benefit from top of the line technology, a highly accredited teaching staff, field trips, and well developed special education program. But as a Black parent, I fed into the false narrative that to obtain the best educational opportunities, you had to go to school with white families. My children did get a solid academic experience. However, it severely lacked in the way of cultural relevance, and they were part of a handful of students of color, and my financial standing was in no comparison to the other parents at the school. So, at a young age, my children had to face many biases that no child should ever have to deal with. So during the time my children attended Swigert, I also worked at a Title I school about a mile away. While working there, I could not help but compare the school my child attended and the school that I worked at. I was definitely disillusioned every time I walked through the doors of the school that I actually worked at. I was able to clearly see what the school lacked by way of technology, highly qualified staffing, effective special education, and gifted and talented programming. It was essentially non existent. The school itself at the time was dilapidated and in desperate need of repair. So there was no air conditioning. Um, a lot of the classrooms had broken windows. The teaching staff worked incredibly hard with what they had, but the struggle was difficult, even for the most committed teachers. The school definitely was not the thriving environment those students deserved. The mere fact that these two schools were in close proximity to one another, but so vastly different in funding opportunities, was deplorable. The fact that I was able to experience both sides of funding simultaneously just infuriated me. At the time, I didn't know what I could do, and like so many other parents, I only did what I thought was best for my family. The fact that Colorado ranks as the lowest per child funding, then we couple that with the inequities in distribution of those funds, which to me seems to favor majority white schools over majority non-white schools. I think this topic should be on all. I think this topic should be at the top of all legislators' agenda. If a good education is the so-called great equalizer, why in 2020 are we still having the conversation of inequality in educational resources? All students must receive the same educational access. There is no longer a tolerance for excuses. Systemic changes are needed at the federal level, state, and district level relative to educational funding, policy, principle, and practice. Enough is enough, and we can no longer wait for someone else to make these changes. It's up to us to make these changes now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cody, for sharing your story with us. Michael Reed from CCG and Denver NAACP, welcome.
Thank you, Aubrey. Can you all hear me? Give me a, okay, awesome. All right. So again, thank you for sharing that, Cody, your experience. And I want to introduce myself. My name is Michael Reed. As Aubrey just said, I am currently serving as the first vice president for the Denver branch of the NAACP. And, I'm just going to share a little bit of my story of why I started organizing. Quite frankly, I was just really sick of my community being used as support for legislation. And the legislation was actually hurting my community, and we weren't even included in the process. So it was a kind of a double whammy for us. I saw this happen during the past legislative session as well. And it made me realize it's not enough to simply just cast my vote, right? And then just sit back and hope that my representative, they're gonna make the best decisions for me and my community. It just doesn't happen like that. For instance, I mean, if I'm speaking, if I'm not speaking facts, somebody please call me out. I spoke with a number of folks recently who felt really blindsided by the Biden administration for not providing national waivers for standardized testing this year. I mean, that was something that I don't think most folks saw coming. And like I said, it was a gut punch for a lot of folks. So again, I see organizing as the way that we can build power. We can build enough collective power to decide what's in our best interest, and then we can hold our elected officials accountable. We need to build more power collectively if we want to make these large structural changes that we want to make. And building power starts with working on local issues and grow the number of people involved in our work. And that's what we're doing here tonight. Again, we're talking about education funding. Again, that's the foundational issue that we're discussing tonight. But I really encourage everyone to use these breakout sessions in the next bit of time that we have to reflect on the issues that you're compelled to build more power around. What keeps you up at night, and what's important to you, and what's important enough for you to do something about it. So like I said, we're going to transition now into what we call house meetings, and we're going to break out into smaller groups. What we're going to do is there's going to be one leader from either Grade Ed or CCG, and we're going to spend the next 20 to 25 minutes, maybe even 30 minutes in our house meeting, just sharing our stories, talking about what's important to us, and then deciding what we want to do about that. I will go ahead and drop it back to the co-host, either Aubrey, I'm guessing, or Annalise, one of the two, and then you can break us out into the house meetings and quarterly.
Thank you, Michael. Nicole, are we ready for the breakout rooms?
We are.
All right, so everyone, as Michael just shared, there will be a facilitator either from CCG or from Grade Ed to lead you through some questions so that we can have some meaningful conversations together. And we look forward to hearing about how your conversations have gone. We have about 30 minutes in our breakout rooms, and we hope you all get some good conversations out of this time.
I got cut off mid-sentence.
Then invite.
Me too. I was sharing something, it was gold. So good.
Hey, Brock, I ended up facilitating that house meeting, by the way. Just FYI.
Tiffany did a great job, Brock. Since I didn't make the early call, I didn't know if I was obligated, but thank you, Tiffany. You're the boss.
All right, so we've had a chance to, or I'm not sure even if everyone's back. Should we just wait a little second here or hop in?
I think we're good.
Everything's back, but Chris needs to go first.
Yes.
Chris needs to make the announcement.
Si necesitan interpretación del inglés al español, van a hacer clic en el globo abajo en tu pantalla de Zoom. Está entre el círculo de record y la cara de reactions. Y enseguida tienen que escoger la opción de español. Si tienen cualquier pregunta o comentario mientras estamos hablando, lo pueden decir en español y vamos a traducirlo al inglés para todos. Gracias.
Okay. All right, so now that we've come back from our house meetings, we kind of want to get a few reactions from folks. So, ours was really great. We could have, I think, spent another 30 minutes in there, but seeing how we don't have that time, let's see. Let's call on Tiffany. Who was leading your house meeting, or who can report back from your house meeting?
I was leading the house meeting.
Who can report back?
Maybe I'll let Chris do that.
Of course.
Well, thank you, Tiffany, for leading. I think everybody felt the same way. We were starting to have a really good discussion. But I think we came right out of the gate talking about the gross inequities within our schools and how it's just not fair from a very personal level, how schools that members shared, Lee shared, that were only a mile apart had a world of difference. You know, one PTO is raising $500,000 and the other can barely raise $5,000. And this is within a mile within our own cities. Anecdotally, there's a story about a 6-year-old who had never been to the Denver Zoo. Tiffany shared her kids never get to the mountains. So not even talking about curriculum, not even talking about test scores or violence in schools. I mean, just these really heart-wrenching, inequitable accounts pretty much predominated in our meeting. We were lucky to have a school board member, Juliet from Colorado Springs, and that's just awesome. And it's just great to have that level of leadership. And I think I'm proud to say that Springs, the school board, and the superintendent, who is African-American, Dr. Thomas from the Rondo neighborhood of Minneapolis, might be a good person to bring on in the future. But I would just say we got started. If anybody else wants to add something, that was my takeaway.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And, you know, let's get one more in here real quick, if we can. Mondi, would you be able to share with us just, you know, your general takeaways, you know, what moved you, those kinds of things? Mandy, I said Mondi. Mandy, my apologies.
Me?
That's you. Yes.
Oh my gosh. There was a mix of experiences in our group. There was a brave woman, God bless her, who is a mom and a student at the same time, and also very connected and engaged in the community. There were 2, I believe, retired educators who have been doing the good work in education organizing for a very long time, who shared a little bit of them.
Hang on, Mandy. That's a really good recap. What got to you? What resonated with you is the question.
That there's people that are in it for the long haul, and it's the good work and it's important, and that's what stuck with me.
So what are you what are you willing to do? Are you willing to do anything personally, like as a result of what you heard tonight, or how are you feeling as a result of any of this?
I am going to seek opportunities to engage with my college institution that I'm currently enrolled in and continue with our community organizing around PTAs in our local school district.
Okay, awesome. Okay.
Thank you for your patience.
And then, no, absolutely. No, and again, so this is kind of, you know, again, one of the points of this is to understand really what resonates with you, and, you know, how can we support that, you know, what you're willing to do, you know? And so I think that's just a really important point. Thank you really for sharing that. And I'm going to transition off. Before I do, I just want you all to understand that, yeah, I know we don't have as much time as we might have liked in those meetings, but definitely connect with folks. If you found folks who resonated with you, if their stories resonated, connect with them through the chat, reach out to us at CCG as leaders or Great Ed. We'll make sure you all have the contact information. So I'm gonna, with that, I'm gonna transition, back to the co-chairs. So Annalise and Aubrey, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to all of you who brought your backgrounds and experience into those house meeting conversations. We're going to move on to our advocacy panel. And for this panel, we're hoping that everyone here, if you haven't already taken action in your community, we hope that you're thinking of ways that you can do so, and how you can advocate in your communities and organize in your communities as well. Our goal is to share stories, share lessons learned, and really dive into the practice of organizing and advocacy so that we can leave here today with examples of how we can continue to lead in our communities. Annalise?
Thanks, Aubrey. So I have the pleasure to introduce everyone who is going to share their experiences. And I just want to also shout out Mandy Lee. She follow Great Ed on Twitter. Go ahead. Like this was perfect segue because I was going to try and figure out how to do it, but thanks, Mike. Alley-oop there. So I also would be, I'm not sure how everyone else's house meeting went, and this is not exactly in the script necessarily. However, please look into the historical context of, where this work really derived from, and you'll find it's a rich history where grassroots efforts really have been sustained. And imagine where do ideas come from, and conversations, those tough ones, is usually around food, right? That's why everyone hates Thanksgiving. No, whoops. But also you can have an intentional conversation. So taking a moment, definitely after, and look into, the history of house meetings. And so you had a virtual one, and definitely as things progress, figure out, how you could even bring people in if you're comfortable, or host your own, right? I definitely took away a lot, even with the about 5 people in my group. Just it was reassuring for me that folks are committed, just like Mandy said, and even if it's not for the long haul, whatever your job is at the time, still important, right? So it's part of holding a baton, or holding up that torch, and so every piece counts. Without further ado, I would like to introduce, we have 4 panelists, and there's 3 questions. And so they'll be able to introduce themselves and then give some insight and share their connection. But Christy Leach, parent in Denver.
Hi.
Oh,
do you
they're
want
all here too. Hey.
Yeah, everyone's here. Do you want me to start, or are you going to introduce everyone?
I'll just say everyone's name first, and then I'll say well, you know what? Go ahead. Introduce yourself. Go ahead.
Well, I'm Christy Leach. I'm a parent in DPS. I have 2 students, one in 4th grade, one in 6th grade, and I've been volunteering with Great Ed since about February of 2019, doing all sorts of different stuff. So that's the short story.
Awesome. Yeah, you're a long hauler, huh?
Yes.
All right. And this is a teachable moment with Whitney Tautenhoeft. And she knows I was struggling to make sure I pronounce it right. Did I do it okay, Whitney?
No, that was good.
Okay, as a teacher, it's definitely best practice to respect the names that are given, and that we call each other by, and for students especially to be seen. So thank you for bearing with me on that, Whitney.
I'm Whitney. I'm a high school senior at Fairview in Boulder. And I'm also the president of a club at my school / student organization called Funding Our Future, which basically has a very similar, mission to Great Ed, in that we work towards adequate and equitable education funding in the state.
Thank you, Whitney. And Queen, parent from Fort Collins.
Good evening. My name is Queen. I'm of course a parent here in Fort Collins. I'm also the CEO and founder of Queen's Legacy Foundation in New Ice Village. I've advocated for public education as a parent and community member. My personal experience as a parent advocate exposed my family to systemic patterns caused by the lack of accountability of the public education system. My personal experience as a community advocate highlighted disparities in resources for BIPOC children within the public education system. As a parent, I have served on PSD school boards and committees bringing awareness to the school to prison pipeline, as well as the negative effects which cause generational trauma. As a community member, I currently sit on several committees with the focus on early childhood education and mental health. Thanks, Nina.
Showing some love here. Thank you, Queen. And next, last but not least, we have Claudia Newfield, an educator in Adams 12.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm Claudia, and I'm a Colorado native. I've been teaching and working in schools for almost 20 years now. I have my hands in lots of different things, but right now I identify as an educator activist slash research activist. So a lot of my current focus is counter narratives and looking at students within the educational system, not as we tend to do from the deficit lens, but celebrating the assets that kids bring to their schools. So I taught English for quite a long time. I was an administrator, and now I'm a social emotional learning specialist. But the best work that I do, I think, comes from being a parent as well. So I kind of wear all four of the hats that we were talking about: student, educator, parent, and community member. So I'm really happy to be here tonight. Thank you.
Appreciate that. You know, I just take care of my dog and that's all I got. No, I really just appreciate everyone. And you all have pretty much highlighted just your space in the education community and your connection. But if you would not mind, I would love to hear a story in particular that maybe led you to this space that you're currently in. And if anyone would like to go first, is pressing, you want to share this now, it's on the tip of your tongue, you've been waiting all day, let me know. Otherwise I can call on the first person.
Well, I'm prepared with something already written, so.
Okay, Queen, let's go. Grayson.
And you said just like a story, or are you just like seriously pertaining to question 2?
If you want to combine the two, I think that's fine. So if you have your story that it highlights some obstacles that you experience, absolutely share that with us.
I relocated my family to Colorado 13 years ago. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn. And from the beginning, my sons were targeted by SROs in the Laramie County Police Department. We dealt with harassment from law enforcement and also housing discrimination. My experiences have been shared across Colorado through a variety of opportunities, like the panel that's taking place today. Through my efforts, I've seen immediate improvement in the inclusivity of the BIPOC community on different boards and committees, and an increased focus on the mental health of youth. And despite the improvements, many spaces remain very white. It can be difficult working with individuals who are colorblind, but have non-resolved the biases. With that being said, here's a little quick story. So I did move here 13 years ago, and because the community that I live in was not ready for diversity, they didn't know. So it was just like, call the police. And being a single mom, I'd had no support. I did not know where to turn. And of course, the systems came in, you know, CPS and diversion. And they say that they're there to help. And honestly, it really doesn't. And when I reached out to the school, unfortunately, there was no one there that could support me. There were no counselors that were Black, that understood my trauma and the fact that I was in an all-white space from a new state. There was no one at the district level that could speak to me. And because of my culture, because I was Black and nobody understood me, it was very we just need to push her to the side. Let's, you know, or try to merge her with the Latinx community and see if they could probably help her with her agenda. So as far as education in Laramie County, I've actually decided to educate my own children. I've reached out to CSU and I've retained a dean of students. She's a master's student at CSU doing teaching, and she's come alongside our organization to help with the curriculum to teach our children, because it's really hard for our kids to be in these white spaces as well. So we're doing what we can in the space that we can to try to make it as safe as possible. That's my story.
Thank you for sharing. And, you know, I shared in my house meeting some information about my experience as a Black educator working with Black male youth. And I can definitely attest to the limitations that are evident as far as helping the Black male students succeed and like deliberate things to prevent them from achievement. So I would love to talk to you offline. And thank you for being willing to share, for sure. You know, your story is so valuable. And as a parent, I can only imagine, you know, like I said, I only have a dog. So I'm like, man, and as a teacher, I get it. You're going to fight and not fight to like be causing issues, but to stand in that space of the gaps that you're seeing, like, this is wrong. We need something to happen.
And that's what made me advocate so much, because I didn't see it. And I was like the only one, and we needed my voice heard. And I have to say, there are great white allies here. I sometimes I hate that word, but there are great white allies here in Laramie County, Fort Collins, that are able to help move my agenda forward as best as they can in their spaces. So we do have people here using their power and their privilege to help move us as best as they can.
Thank you. And that's why we're here too. So I would love to hear from, you know, Claudia, as an educator, if you have some obstacles and or would be willing to share how you have built power with your community around public education.
Sure thing. I think it's probably easiest for me to just talk about one school where I worked. In Aurora Public Schools, I worked at Vaughn Elementary, and this was a few years ago, if you remember back when ICE was doing major sweeps and contacting people in their homes, in businesses, and at schools. We had almost 95% of our families were immigrant families. And so the impact was pretty significant on our community. And some of the work that I did, which I guess I keep coming back to this idea of leading from where you're at. And I've been reading this book by Alicia Garza, The Purpose of Power, and she talks about inheriting a movement. And so nothing that I'm sharing is really special to me. It's not necessarily anything that only I could do. Anybody could do this, but I think it took being able to see the inequities first and naming them. Some of the work that I did was develop a behavior protocol. So rather than students being pushed out of the classroom for behavior issues, I would go to the classroom and I would document what the behavior was and how I could either push in and support. A lot of times I would tap in and let the teacher go take a break so they could calm down. But for the first quarter of that school year, all I did was gather data about how many instructional minutes were lost with these students being pushed out of the classroom. And it was in the thousands. And it was only brown and Black boys. And we called it what it was. We named it. And it was an uncomfortable conversation. But for the last 3 quarters of the school year, we completely shifted to a restorative practice model where kids were being taught skills to do better, not expected to just, navigate a system that was built for them to fail. Another thing that I did, which was super exciting at that school, was to work with parents to write a grant so we could get GED programming in the evening for the parents. So during the day, their kids would come to school, and at night, the parents would walk to the school and they would have GED programming provided to them at no cost. The other thing that I did at that school was developed a home visit protocol And we took an entire day. Teachers went out. It was a walking school, and we all went and saw the families. And I think there's this false narrative sometimes that parents aren't invested. And I believe, in fact, parents send the very best they have. And so the very best they have are in these classrooms. And sometimes parents just need to be taught how to help their kids. And so what we did was we had specific bags of resources, and we taught the parents how to go through things like literacy reading cards so they could get doubled up, right? Their kids are learning to read at home, they're learning to read at school. And so I think that was probably one of the stories that best demonstrates this idea that you lead from wherever you are. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to be the expert in the field. If you have a passion for advocating for kids and for education, you're exactly in the right place.
Thank you for that, for your work, for one, and definitely check out the chat. Folks are definitely appreciating your stories, ladies, so far. And that leading from wherever you are, very, very important. I would love to hear a student perspective of leading from where you are. Definitely, you're in the midst of this, right? We're here for you, right? As a student, I would love to hear in your experience, what are some highlights or obstacles? And you've already shared a little bit already on how you are contributing to making a difference around public education. So I'm excited to hear.
Thank you. Yeah. So as I said before, I'm a high school senior. So I remember just going back to the presentation, I'm that generation that now starting in kindergarten and through now has seen the effects of underfunding. But I really got involved or interested in public education funding when I was a sophomore in high school. I was in AP US History at Fairview, my school, and I had a history teacher who in the first week of school, he assigned us like a take-home essay assignment with the prompt, why is Fairview, our school, ranked so highly in the state compared to other public schools? And I just remember doing research that night to write the essay and looking up statistics and different facts, and then basically coming to the conclusion that, honestly, it boils down to Boulder and BVSD and Fairview receive more funding than most other schools in the state. And that was something that was really interesting to me. I mean, I'd always been interested in education, sort of, and my parents had always, I remember sitting, being 5 years old or something, and my mom watching the presidential debates or something and being I wish that they talked about education more and education funding. It's always a back burner issue. So that had always sort of been something that I was aware of and cared about, but I didn't know anything about the specifics of education funding in Colorado. And so that was sort of the beginning of I started doing a bunch of research into, how it really works and how crazy it is. And then decided with a few friends to just start a club at our school, or to advocate for more funding and equitable funding, because on the state level, and also specifically within BVSD, because even though BVSD does receive more funding than many other districts, we also had a huge achievement gap. So there's lots of work to be done at every level. So that's sort of how I got involved. I guess some of the highlights for me has definitely been talking to other students from other districts, hearing their stories about how they have experienced underfunding, and then also talking with teachers at my school who have taught at many different districts, and can really reflect on what those discrepancies look like and how it's affected them in the class and their students. So I would say that has really been a gift to me, just connecting with other people and sort of forming a community around this within my school, and then also just larger than my school too. So yeah, that would be a highlight. Yeah.
Thank you. And, you know, it takes a really caring heart to look beyond your current privilege, as we would, you know, been labeling these things, or access, to identify, hey, other people don't have the same thing as me. So what can I do to make this right? Like, and even just the first step of learning, right, is really important, because when you are educated on the matter, people can't just pass laws, right? And then you can also gain support, like we're doing now with from grassroots, right? Your friends telling them, getting them on board. Very important work you're doing, and excited for you as a senior. You know, you're going to take this energy and cause some trouble, some good trouble, right? There are some questions in the chat too, so we'll try and, you know, monitor that a little more, but it's a great opportunity to follow up and join the efforts that are existing, following Great Ed, following Coloradans for the Common Good, and just staying active as well. Last but certainly not least, another parent perspective is a blessing and to have an opportunity to hear straight from your experiences. And you've been a longtime supporter of Great Ed, and it's definitely appreciated. But I would like for those who do not know you to hear your story and be able to learn some of the ways you've contributed. And if you do have a story to highlight, that'd be great to hear.
Sure. Thanks, Annalise. So like I said, my name's Christy, and I have two students in DPS, 4th and 6th grade boys. And I have a son with ADHD. So my advocacy journey started as kind of being a parent advocate for my student and for my son to kind of figure out how he can navigate the school system and what accommodations he needed and the 504 plan and that whole business. But along the way, I realized that, you know, a lot of that was falling on the teachers. And then I started to see, well, the teachers don't have time. They have 30 kids in a class. And how are they supposed to help every student who needs special attention? My son's not the only one. I'm sure there's multiple students. And then I started thinking, same thing, if I'm a parent that's privileged and I can take that time to work with the teachers, work with my son, what about the kids whose parents don't have that privilege and who have to work and they don't have time to advocate like this for their parents? Why isn't the school taking care of this for them? And so that whole parent piece of it led me down this rabbit hole, talking to teachers, and the teacher strike, when that came up, I started learning about their salaries and about funding and just about kind of how the whole system worked. And it was so obvious that it really did start at the top. It starts with funding, it starts with resources, and to make anything equitable, you really need the resources to do so. And so that's what led me to Great Ed. After being a PTSO parent, raising the funds and getting excited, oh, we raise money, what kind of fun things are we gonna do? We're gonna pay for teachers. That's what we're gonna do, because we need teachers in the building. And again, that was just a big blow. And I made it kind of my mission to say, all right, if funding is the issue, then who do we need to talk to and what do we need to do? And so that's how I found Great Ed. I did some advocacy training with them. And honestly, I was just a parent. You know, I'm a nurse by trade. I'm not a teacher or an educator or anything. It was just through hearing other people's stories and hearing teachers talk about their experience and seeing what the school looked like on a daily basis and kind of what students were having to go through, and just all the underfunding. So I hooked up with Great Ed and I did some of their advocacy training, and then I attended a lobby day and I went to a luncheon, and pretty soon I'm talking to legislators, and then I'm testifying in front of the Senate Education Committee as a parent and just saying, like, look, this is what we need for our students. And you are the people who can make this change. You are the people who make this happen. Like Annalise said, we can't write the laws, they have to do it. And, you know, just starting to realize that that power comes from us, regular people, parents, students, teachers, really just standing up and saying, this is what we need, and we're holding you accountable. And we need you to, you know, help in this way and put education first, especially in Colorado when it comes to funding. You know, I've pretty much told Great Ed, if you need help, I'm happy to do whatever. And I have time. I have that luxury of time. But honestly, some of the stuff that I do is like, I have an email list of all my parent friends. So if an issue comes up on the ballot, I say, okay, here's a link to Great Ed's website. Here's the next thing we all need to pay attention to. When you go to vote, here's what you should be thinking of, and here's how you should vote. And hey, can you write a letter? Can you do this quick action, write a letter to our representative? So, you know, honestly, even if you're a working parent, I know we all don't have a lot of time, but there are just so many small things we can all do to help build that power and connect our communities and help them understand that their voice in education funding is what's going to make that difference. Because what I found is a lot of parents don't understand how schools are funded. And just in talking to people and getting the word out, I think that really helps people understand, like, wow, I didn't realize that, you know, our state has the lowest tax rate of any state in the country and that kind of thing. So honestly, carrying petitions, I've done that. And it's something where I went to school, you know, I stood on the playground after school and I said, hey, can you sign this petition? Can you sign this petition? And there's lots of small actions we can all take. And I guess that's just my piece that I want to tell everyone is it's not scary. You don't have to be the person that goes to the Capitol and testifies. You can be the person that sends an email to 20 of your friends. And that's just as important as some of the higher level stuff. But if you want to get involved, Great Ed is amazing. I would say with obstacles, the biggest obstacles I find are honestly, people don't have a lot of time and it's hard to recruit people to the cause. But I think the more you do it, the more you'll slowly get people who kind of ask you. Then they come and ask you, hey, I saw this on the ballot. This has to do with education. What do you know about this? And so they do become involved. And even if they don't respond initially, I have now a lot of friends, every time elections come up, they text me and they say, hey, what should I vote on this? How should I vote for this? I know this has to do with education. So those small things are going to help us build that power to really, you know, create some change that's meaningful. Highlights are just, you know, getting to hear everyone's stories that really like motivates me and it kind of impassions me to keep going because it is discouraging sometimes. It's really discouraging to see some of these ballot measures fail and to not have that change happen quickly. But I know that it takes time and just keep fighting the good fight. But hearing all the stories and like Queen, your story and hearing what you have to say, I mean, there's so much work to be done and we all need to be part of that. And it keeps me going. So I'm here for the long haul. I'll be here for a long time. But anyway, that's kind of my story. And I just encourage parents to jump in and do what you can, even if you think it's nothing and you go, oh, well, I don't have time because I don't have time to do that. You would be surprised, you know, what you have time for. That's all I want to pass on.
You know what, Christy? First of all, thank you for bringing that power up. Man, this is the whole point. We're powering up for public ed. You brought that energy. You reminded us why we're here, wherever you're at, right? And people do have questions, right? And I remember this last ballot. People came to me and I was like, yeah, here's the flyer to tell you, vote straight to here. Or the conversations, you know, we sure do see those multiple taxes being taken out and don't know where that funds are going. So we definitely can benefit from having more information that's specific, you know, to, okay, we're not really funding our schools, right? And marijuana money, all that aside, where does it go? People don't know. But all of the panelists, you know what, your stories are impactful, reminding us. I feel like if we started at like a zero charge at the beginning, you're like, oh man, a dinner, I didn't eat, I'm doing this summit. I feel like we're about like 90% now, you know? So let's get to 100% powered up for public education. And I, again, thank you so much for your stories. I'm gonna pass it on to my co-host, Aubrey, and she's gonna wrap us up. Thanks again, folks.
Thanks, Annalise. And once again, thank you to our panelists, Christy, Whitney, Queen, and Claudia. You all had such interesting perspectives to share on how you're getting involved in your communities and advocating for public education. It's so inspiring to hear so many different ways that our colleagues and our friends and our community members are getting involved, but also to get ideas on how we can get more involved and try to get our friends and community members involved as well. So thank you all so much for your time and sharing your stories. We'd also like to thank all of you who have participated this evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being interested. Thank you for wanting to do more to build this power. To our speakers, Cody and Michael, and again, our panelists, thank you so much for your time. I know that you all put a little bit of extra time into your day to prepare what you wanted to say to this group this evening, and we really appreciate that time. Also like to send a big thank you out to our CCG leaders and our Great Ed leaders for the time you put in, not only to this event, but to the work that you do in general as well, to bring us all together and work together for these common goals and common causes. As we move on this evening, we'd like to encourage you to consider holding a house meeting of your own in your community and continuing these conversations. We all have certain needs in our communities. We all have certain interests in our communities, and we're not the only ones. So if you'd like information on how to conduct a house meeting, CCG and Great Ed have wonderful trainings to help you get set up on how to do that. If you're interested in diving deeper into funding for public education, Great Ed has sorry, I'm losing my words here. Great Ed has the ability to come into your schools, to your churches, to your community centers and share these conversations, get these conversations going as well. We also encourage you to reach out to your state representatives and tell them that it's important to you that they attend the next meeting of the Public Education Study Group, which is coming up this Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. This will be convened by Representatives McLaughlin and Byrd. And the purpose of this group is to teach all legislators the fundamentals and the history of education policy in Colorado. And this is not a caucus. The aim is not to push a policy agenda, but our topic will be at the next meeting. It will be school finance, the school finance bill, and legislators will learn directly from Colorado practitioners. So again, having those unique voices and experiences being brought to the table and shared with those legislators, like what Christy was sharing earlier in the panel, that would be a great opportunity for this conversation to continue at that level. We also encourage you to reach out if you had an interesting conversation and you'd like to continue that conversation with someone in your house meeting, or you'd like to reach out to one of the panelists. If you haven't had an opportunity yet to get their contact info, we can help you get in contact with one another through CCG and Great Ed. And we'd love to hear those conversations continue, and we'd love to assist you with continuing to facilitate those conversations as well. You will be receiving a follow-up email after tonight's event on how you can get involved in the future and how you can connect if you'd like to seek those further connections and stay in contact and join future actions as well. Thank you again. It's been a pleasure to be here with all of you this evening, and I'm just going to turn it over to Annalise one final time to close us out.
Hey, so we have a number of questions for following up and participating. Look out in your email. We will make sure that you receive the information referred or mentioned during this meeting and this Power Up for Public Education experience you just participated in. And so definitely look out for links. You got to follow folks on the socials though, okay? Meet us where we're at. You're on your phone, right, folks? Come on. So we will post certain pieces of information throughout the week, and you can stay updated in that regard. Twitter, Instagram, and from there's even an action to tell your legislators to click the link, take action. There's tons of things to do. Sorry, trying to read the chat, can't do it all. But I will say I'm at 95%. My laptop's at 54 just because I've been on Zoom. But hopefully by the end of tonight's experience, you are going to commit to taking one of those actions mentioned by Aubrey or the panelists, or inspired by the folks who shared earlier. I don't know about you, Aubrey, what are you at? What level are you charged up and powered up at? Tell me.
I'm supercharged. All of these inspiring stories tonight have, I would say I'm right there at 95 with you, Annalise.
You know, because 100 would mean I'm probably like holding a petition. So I'm at 95. Oh, we got Lee. She's at 100. Okay, I look, let them tell it. Well, that's all I have. And it's been really exciting to, again, see folks all ready for whatever we need to do to invest in public education. So thank you for your time, and let's stay charged.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.